So let's look at our Banzhaf power index. A coalition is a set of players that join forces to vote together. And you see this all the time in Congress. Now, if there are three players, player one, player two, and player three, then the coalitions would be, you'd have the single player coalitions, the double player coalitions, and a three-player coalition, or in this case, that would be the grand coalition. Now, not all of these coalitions will be winning coalitions. So to find out if a coalition is a winning or not, you look at the sum of the weights in the coalition and then compare that sum to the quota. And if the sum is the quota or more, then the coalition is a winning coalition. So if we look at this example with a quota of 17 and weights 12, 7, and 3, here they listed single person coalitions, and 12, 7, and 3 are all less than the quota of 17. So these would be called losing coalitions. If we look at mixing player 1 and player 2, that has a total of 19, and 19 is greater than the quota. So this is a winning coalition. But player 2 and player 3, if you total them up, only have 15, which is smaller than 17. So this one would be losing. This is very similar to our last example. Player 2 and player 3 only total 10, and 10 is less than 17, so it's losing. And player 1, 2, and 3 totals 22, so it's winning because it's greater than 17. And this is going to help us identify our Banzhaf power. So in each of the winning coalitions, you'll notice there may be a player or players that if they were to leave the coalition would be a losing coalition. And if there is such a player, they are called critical players. So a critical player is the same as a player with veto power. And that'll be critical or important for us to look at as we look at the Banzhaf power index. So in the weighted voting system, 12, 7, or 17 with the quota 12, 7, and 3 that we looked at above, determine which players are critical players, and then we configure their Banzhaf power index. So if we go back up here to look at which players are critical players, in this coalition of two players, player 1 and player 2, where their total is 19, so it's winning because it's greater than 17. Both of the players are necessary, so both player 1 and player 2 are critical in this coalition. Then we look at our other winning coalition. And here, player 1 and player 2, but if we lost player 3 here with just 3 points, if we lost him, we'd be at 19, which would still be winning because our quota is 17. So player 3 is not winning. But in this coalition also, player 1 and player 2 would be considered critical because they have veto power. Now, what we're going to learn is how to calculate their overall power using the Banzhaf power index. It says that any player, so the player's power is the total number of times they're critical over the total number of critical players. So let's look at that in the previous example. Here we had player 1 and player 2 being critical, and here we had player 1 and player 2 being critical. So for their power, for player 1, he was critical twice. And in total, there were 4 critical players, 1, 2 here, and 2 there. So out of 4, so he has half the power for this system. Player 2, similarly, was critical once, twice, out of a total of 4. So he has half the power. And player 3 has no power. That's how we look at the Banzhaf power index here. So that's how you calculate it. Now, how many coalitions are possible? 2 to the n, where n is the number of players, minus 1. So if you have 5 players, then you'd have 2 to the 5th minus 1. 2 to the 5th on your calculator would be 32 minus 1, or there would be 31 possible coalitions. Now, not all the coalitions are winning. And for Banzhaf Power Index, we only have to consider the winning ones. So let's look at this crazy example that we have here. So in the next example, it says we have a weighted voting system where the quota is 58 and the players have weights 30, 25, 22, 14, and 9. And we want to find the Banzhaf Power Index for each player. So I listed all of there are 5 players, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I listed all the possible coalitions. So there are one-person coalitions. If we look at this, the highest player has a weight of 30, right? And that does not meet the quota. So none of these one-person coalitions do we have to consider ourselves. But that would be those are coalitions, but we don't have to look at them when we're looking at the power index. Now, if we look at the 2-person coalitions, player 1 and player 2 are 30 and 25. That's the highest amount of weight if you add those two together, if you added any 2-person coalitions. But 30 and 25 only makes 55. So here are all the 2-person coalitions, and none of them are going to meet the quota either, because the quota is 57, and the highest 2 players only added up to be 55. So we don't have to look at any of those. So that makes it a little bit easier. But then we jump to our 3-person coalitions. And in our 3-person coalitions, I kind of did it systematically. So I did player 1, player 2, player 3, player 1, player 2, player 4, player 1, player 2, player 5, and those 3 are here. Then we go player 1, player 3, player 4, player 1, player 3, player 5, etc. And then player 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 5. Anyway, they're all here. There are 10 3-person coalitions. So you try to do it systematically so you don't leave any of them out. And the way you know that there were 10 is there are 5 players to choose from, and you're choosing 3 at a time. And on your calculator, 5 choose 3 is this calculation here, and it equals 10. So there are going to be 10 3-person coalitions. You didn't have to know that. Yeah, just have to try to find them. But that might help you know if you're missing one. Then you go through these 3-player coalitions, and you evaluate which of them has a quota of at least 58, or a total of at least 58. Now this first one does, the second one does 64, I added them up. 61, okay, this one doesn't at 53, nope. 61, this one's good. 56, 48, and 45. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these, which are winning coalitions. And if we look at our 4-player coalitions, they are all winning because they all have a total greater than 58. And then we have our grand coalition, which includes all of the players. So now in these remaining coalitions, we have to see who has veto power. But it's kind of easy because, well, if we look at this, if we look at this one where we have player 1, player 2, and player 3, that's total is 77. I usually start with the lowest player. So player 3 has a total of 22. If I remove 22 from 77, I've only got 55. And the total, I need 58. So if I can't take out player 3, I can't take out player 1 or player 2. So all 3 of these players are critical in this Banzhaf Power Index. And because these are the highest 3 players, if we can't remove, well, let's I think all of them are going to be critical in this. Let's look at player 1, player 2, and player 4. Player 1, player 2, and player 4, if you add it together, you get 67. If we remove player 4, he's 14. So 67 minus 14 would give us 53. That does not meet the quota. So all 3 of these are critical also. And I think what we're going to find is that in all of these, all of the players are going to be critical because we have to add up to be at least 58. So I underlined the critical players. That'll be helpful for us as we go to figure out the Banzhaf power index. Now, in these four-person coalitions, it's going to be different. Not all of them will be critical. So if I look at my first one, the total, if I add player 1, 2, 3, and 4 together is 91. If I took away player 4 at 14, that'd be okay. I'd still be at 67, which is greater than 58, so I can take him away. Let's look. If I remove player 3 is 22. So if I do 91 minus 22, that would be 9, and this would be 3, 69. So I'd still be okay if I removed player 3, but kept player 4. So, but player 3 can be tossed. What about player 2 at 25? 91 minus 25. That's going to be 6 and 66. So that's still good. He can be removed. Let's look at player 1. 91 minus 30. That's 61. That's still greater than 58. So none of the players are critical players there. I didn't have a single critical player in that coalition. Let's look at this. So then we proceed through the next one. Here, 1, 2, 3, and 5 adds up to be 86. So 86, if I lost player 5, I'd lose 9. That's 77. That still meets the quota. So he's fine. If I lost player 3 here is 14. I'd be at 72. So I'd still meet the quota. Player 2 is 25. I'd still be at 61, so that's fine. Player 1, 86 minus 30. Now I'm at 56, which does not meet the quota. So I can't lose player 1. So player 1 is critical in this coalition. Let's look at our next coalition. The total of these 4 players is 76. So if I take 76 and subtract player 5, I'm going to be at 67, which still meets the quota, so I don't need player 5. If I take 76 minus player 4, which is 14, I'm going to be at 62, which is still greater than the quota. If I take 76 and subtract player 2, I'm going to be at 51. Can't subtract player 2 or player 1. So both of these are going to be critical. Once I know player 2 is critical, since player 1 has more weight than he does, I know I can't subtract him either. All right. So that was this. Now let's look at this one. We're at 75. So we have 75. If we take away player 5, we know we're still good. That'll be 66. So he's expendable. If we lose player 4, we're going to be at 61. So we can lose him and still meet the quota. We lose player 3. Now, I'm crossing these guys out, but we're still keeping them in the total as we look at successive players that we might lose. So player 3 is 22, and that would be a 53. So we can't lose player 3, and we certainly can't lose player 1. So let's look at player 2 through player 5. Their total is 70, I believe, if this is added correctly. Let's see. The total, it's probably 70. So if we did 70 minus 9, we're still okay. That's 61. So we don't need him. If we do 70 minus 14, that's 56. So we do need player 4, player 3, and player 2 here. We just didn't need player 1. And finally, looking at the Grand Coalition, I don't think anybody's necessary. Because if I look at player 1, if I try to subtract him, oh, let's figure out what the total is first. Pause this. So the total is 100, and if we lose player 1 at 30, we'd still be at 70. So if we can afford to lose player 1, we can afford to lose any of these guys. So none of the players here are going to have veto power or be critical if we have all the other players voting for a motion. So now we go and we count what we have left here. So I'm going to highlight the coalitions that I need to look at here. I'm only looking at these coalitions and the underlined players, which was all of them in the 3-person coalitions. And here the circled players, only where we have circled players, were critical. So now if we look at our, we want to do this. So now if we look at our power index, power for player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4, and player 5, we count how many times players were totally critical. So in this coalition, there were 1, 2, 3 critical players. And here there were 2, so that makes 5, and 2 more makes 7, and 1 more makes 8. And then all of these players were critical in these 3-person coalitions. So we have 8 plus 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. And 8 plus 18 is 26. So the total number of critical players in each of these power indexes is 26. And then we count how many times, for example, player 1 turned up. So player 1 turned up here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He was critical 8 times. If we look at player 2, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times. We look at player 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times for him. If we look at player 4, we have 1, 2, 3 here, 4. He was critical 4 times. And player 5 was critical once, twice. It looks like only twice. So if we add the numerators of our fractions, they should total 26. So we have 14, 20, 26. Yeah. So you could change these, you could reduce these fractions or change them to percentages. Let me do that. Now, this example was a lot harder than any type that you would ever see. I'd never give you 5 players, probably 3. But it was a good example for us to dig in and see if we could identify who was a critical player or not. So as it turns out, player 1 had 30.8% of the power. Player 2 and player 3 were both at 23.1%. Player 4 was at 15.4 and player 5 was at 7.7%. Now, how is this significant? Well, let's say that you're investing in a company and this person remember, this was out of 100 weights, right? So this person put in like 30% of the money for the company and they have 30% of the power. But both these two folks at 25% of the investment and 22% of the investment, they have the same power because of the way the voting system worked out. So it is something for you to consider if you're thinking of going in a company or stocks. And then the person who invested 14 had only 15%, and the person who invested 9 9% of his money only had 7.7% of the power. So that's how this works. And in our next video, we will look at the Shapley-Shubick power index. Thanks for watching.